So I'll share the context of this. Essentially, the humanity awakens, and I'm sure there's lots of other opinions about how this happens, and this isn't the right thing, the only thing. It's just a distinction that may support you. So the philosophy is basically that humanity awakens in three ways. One is through culture, so it could be cultural dancing, like spending time in a culture that's deeply rooted in the original premise of what is to be a human being. It could be through dance, through language, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. Second area, and so people seem to awaken really when they spend time in a culture that brings them together, and they remember what matters to them, where they are unified. Like people that spend time in communities generally have a different relationship to each other than people who are isolated and where they're not able to spend time with their friends and their family. And when there's no song and dance, it's been passed on for generations. I'm originally from Hawaii, and in the Hawaiian culture, there's many songs and dances and a language that's specific to a culture. Okay, so if we immerse ourselves in a culture, then generally what happens is that could be part of the awakening process, going back to the original premise of what it is to be an actual human being.
Yeah, like people, when you go, for example, Eat, Pray, Love, it's a movie, but it represents how through culture, through immersing oneself in like the Indian culture and what it means to be human, and all of the complex layers of questioning who we are that comes with that culture, and the community and the devotion and the song. It brings us to a place of self-realization where we begin to realize that which we thought we are so much more. And so that's an example of how culture can bring us to that point of the awakening to the fact that we are more than what we thought we were.
For example, some of the like people that are in the Amazon and things like that, they have a certain culture that they spend time with, and they have a different relationship with nature than generally people that grow up in New York City with not much culture. I'm not saying that people in New York don't have culture. I'm saying a culture that's really connected to the earth and things of that nature and community.
Yeah, totally. Like I keep going to India, but you've got Nepal, Vanuatu. Like every tradition and civilization has a specific set of cultural conditions or cultural ecosystem that brings us to a point where we begin to realize we're more than we were told we were.
But like the stories carry the medicine. It's the cultures where the stories are passed down over and over again.
Correct. Like Dreamtime in the indigenous culture in Australia, story and the awakening in the Dreamtime is handed down, through dance, through story, through spoken traditions and teachings. Like this is a way that we can reach a point of awakening in this modern context.
I know for myself that like when I would take executives to the jungle, they would of course have their medicines, but there also was a culture that they brought us into as well and shared with us, and that supported those people in going back to what really mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I remember, so we used to run a lot of retreats in Vanuatu, and one of the things that I learned from the culture there is that community doesn't have to be in war with each other. So community doesn't have to be, this is mine, that's yours, put fences up, put walls up, take survival of the fittest. Like community actually can be a place of family above and beyond your blood relatives. And that was a deep awakening for me, because I realized that I come from a culture where we want to separate, we want to own, we want to dominate, we want to compartmentalize.
We're like people want to own land versus land owning us.
They all share land. Like a whole family will live on one plot of land. The village will grow gardens, and those who don't have a job will tend to the gardens. But what will happen is they will share the money that those who have a job earn, and then they share the vegetables that the village has grown in the garden. So it woke me up to the fact that there is a synergistic ecosystem that can exist within community that awakes us to the fact that we are actually one, and that we do naturally want to live in harmony. So that's a way that culture can awaken us.
Absolutely. And so when Westerners tend to spend time in those deep immersion cultures, they start to remember the power of community, the power of culture, the power of song, the power of dance, and they remember their connection to being human. Yeah. And then they no longer look at what separates each other, look at what actually unifies each other, which is friends, family, community. Food, good food. I know that one of the clients I've worked with, like Pan of Chocolate, he's from Greece, and he has a culture of like bringing people together and food, and there's family there, you
Yeah,
know?
I love that.
So there's many beautiful examples of culture as an example for one of the ways that human beings awaken.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Now, the next way human beings awaken is through chemicals. And when I say chemicals, I don't mean like cocaine. I mean like chemicals.
Not taking 20 disco bickies at your local
Yeah, maybe not
2-day
that.
rave.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Maybe
or,
not.
you know, like, although you might think you're enlightened, the come down will definitely thump you back down to earth when you have no serotonin left in your brain.
So
Slightly.
so chemicals is a definition of like, it could be ayahuasca or things like that nature, or chuma, or some of the mushrooms, yeah, through actual shamanic type of ceremonies,
A shift in the biochemistry.
Exactly. And done through, I guess you could say, chemicals with psychedelic experiences, which is basically psychedelic just means outside of mind. And so those are another way that human beings actually can tend to awaken through those processes. And when I say awaken, it doesn't mean like more awake or less awake than anyone else. It just means more awake or less awake doesn't mean it's better or worse. It just is what it is. And so the second way that people can tend to experience their own awakening is actually through chemicals, through chemicals, ayahuasca, wachuma, and medicines combined with culture. Very powerful. Now the third way is what we're going to talk about right now, which is crisis.
Define crisis.
Crisis is some sort of experience that makes you question everything that's real. And so potentially humanity is going through a crisis, which is part of the awakening process. This crisis is forcing people to actually go inward, to look at what they thought was real, to start to question everything around them, so they can go back to who they are and start really questioning where they're actually giving away their power. And so this would be a crisis. A crisis supports us in going inward. And so now I've just noticed is like there's definitely a crisis going on.
It's where so as human beings we really need for everything that we perceive in the world to be measured by what we've perceived in the world before that moment. So we see things based on the past. So when what we see is beginning to shift out of what we know, we begin to feel fear, we begin to feel uncertain, we begin to experience crisis, because that which we anchored to for safety is shifting at a rapid rate, which is kind of what happens in medicine journeys, but just in a way more, I guess, intense way, but at least it wears off. This is not going to wear off anytime soon, so I don't know which is better.
And one of the things that we can learn through transformation work is that everything passes. So that's a presupposition that's very useful, is that everything passes.